Hello everyone, John Drummond here, host of the TNT Show every Wednesday, 7 p.m. on Indy Live. We always have great guests. And this Wednesday, The Nation Talks, TNT, The Nation Talks, to Martyn MP. Don't miss it. See you tomorrow.
Hi, Dr. Dave here. Join me for the Dr. Dave Show, Wednesday night, 9 o'clock, with repeats early Friday morning and 3 o'clock Saturday afternoon. Music, views, your requests and your comments. A great bit of fun and banter. Join me on indylive.radio, a new voice for a new Scotland.
Hi, I'm Fiona from Clackmannanshire Women for Independence. Did you know we have a podcast on Indy Live Radio? Goes out at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, repeated at 6 o'clock on a Thursday. Come and join us for some news, views, opinions, the odd poem. It'd be very nice to have you with us. And come and hear the news you're not getting. Here's some new voices for a new Scotland at Indy Live Radio.
Hello, my name's Steve B and I'm a presenter on Indy Live Radio. I present Music and Musings every Friday night at 7. The music, that's 70s classic rock, although we will take the occasional side road. The musings, well, they're thoughts on Scottish independence, politics and world events from my viewpoint, which is that of a grumpy old man. So join me every Friday night at 7 on Indy Live Radio, a new voice for a new Scotland.
Hi, this is Marley and I'm here to tell you a bit about Daytime Live Show, which goes out Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays on Indy Live Radio at 11:30 for a couple of hours. So I present the programme along with Val, and we're there with a variety of guests to chat to each day. Now, at the moment, Wednesday's show is a catch-up edition. It's not live. What we do is we rebroadcast some of the more recent interviews. So we hope we enjoy all of those. Be there at 11:30 on Indy Live Radio for the news you don't hear elsewhere, a new voice for a new Scotland.
Hi, James E here from the Saturday Show on indylive.radio. We play a wide selection and wide genre of music for your entertainment. We're on Saturday mornings from 10 till 1 p.m. Remember, join us on indylive.radio, a new voice for a new Scotland.
Again, can you be part of it? It's Independence Live. Yeah. A few people asked about YouTube. It'll be YouTube/Independence Live. That's where you'll find the footage.
No Westminster. No Westminster, come on. No Westminster, not for me, not for me. But therefore I'll be your slave. I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Oh, freedom, come on. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom, one more. Oh, freedom over me. But before I be your slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
Wherever you stand, get the fresh view of what's happening in Scotland with iScot. Celebrate everything about our country with intelligent, in-depth insight from lifestyle, culture to puzzles, and all the opinions you'll need. Whether it's digital or by post, subscribe now to iScot.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to the TNT Show, The Nation Talks. You know, it's been another great day for British democracy. Apparently, amongst the many millions and millions of pounds that have been spent on PPE equipment, very rightly, we want folks to be protected, but many millions have been spent in very odd ways with some very strange companies and firms. In fact, one of the beneficiaries of a major contract from the British government was a pest control company. And most recently, we've heard of a company of chocolatiers who've been beneficiaries of the government's largesse. Mind you, it sounds like a sweet deal to me. Hey, I'm John Drummond, your host for the next 60 exciting minutes. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We have yet another great guest tonight, and I'm really excited that he's able to be with us. Stay tuned for news of what's happening in Westminster and many other details besides. But first, a few words about TNT, The Nation Talks. In many respects, this is your show. We take your questions ahead of time, and of course, we are very happy to take your questions online. So as you're listening to us, don't hesitate, call us. The numbers, the details, the access points are all on the screen. And if you're listening to us, then you can contact Indy Live and they will connect you through to us so we can take your question. Now, to our guest this evening. The Nation talks to Martyn Day MP. Martyn is the MP for Linlithgow and East Falkirk, and Martyn's electorate is the largest in Scotland. Martyn joins us from his constituency. Two questions, Martyn. First of all, how are you coping with the pandemic? And what is the connection between you and last week's guest, Fiona Graham?
Thanks, John. Great to be on tonight.
I'm coping reasonably well with the pandemic. I think I've been too busy to suffer from isolation mode, which a lot of people are suffering from the lockdown. So hopefully I can go straight from that ultra busyness into semi-normality as we come out of lockdown. But it's certainly been much more pressuring for my staff. I mean, because of the job of being an MP, I'm used to working on the hoof, on the train, and from the flat in London, and from the office, and all over the place. So remote working is second nature to myself. I've just not been stuck in the living room for quite as long as I have in the current period, whereas that's more of a challenge for the support staff who are used to the office environment and the camaraderie that they get as a team. But just to give an example, day one of lockdown, I think it was the 23rd of March, although I need to check the diary, my inbox received over 1,000 constituent emails, and the following day was almost as much. So that was pretty heavy work, and it's I think we're going to have, I hope we never have that sudden deluge again, but we're going to be pretty solid as people go through this process, because I think we've got a long way to go with the coronavirus, the economic impacts, as well as the longer term health impacts. So a lot of work still to come. I'm just trying to think what the second part of the question was again.
I was interested in the connection between you and
Fiona. Oh yes,
Graham.
indeed. That's right. Well, as Fiona mentioned, she did at one time live in Linlithgow, and our previous married name had been Fiona Bryden, and when she was Fiona Bryden in Linlithgow, she was the first person I ever voted for in a regional council election, which would be 1990. Yep, I would have been 19 at the time. That was the first time she wasn't successful, but that was the case with almost everybody I voted for in those days. So.
Those were the days, weren't they?
They certainly were.
Oh, she's prospering in Orkney, and I hope she's joining us tonight. You mentioned 1,000 emails. I mean, that's extraordinary. Because
yeah.
I mean, think about processing. Speaking to the audience now, think about processing 1,000 emails. I mean, for a start, to give it justice, it takes a couple of 3 minutes to read an email, and then you have to work out how you want to respond, and then you have to respond. And if you introduce that multiplier effect and you multiply it to 1,000, how do you cope with all of that?
It was shell shock, I think. I mean, that first week, all I did, and I was sitting pretty much all day, every day, and I mean literally all day, apart from when I was sleeping, forwarding emails that were from real constituents into our case management system, and my staff were then doing their best to try and respond. And when they didn't know the answer, they would come to me and say, what response do you want to this one? So we were sort of triaging what we were doing, but for the first time ever, we had to really start turning some constituents away. If it was a council-related issue, or it was quite clearly a Scottish Parliament issue, we were having to bat them off to our colleagues in the respective organisations, whereas before we would have just said, well, for the sake of sending which quite often is a letter or an email to an organisation, we'll get the same response as anyone else does. We might as well do that rather than saying go and speak to someone else, which has never been our attitude. We'd rather get a response and then say, here's the response, hopefully it's the one you want. If it's not, this is what we've got back. You might get further by then going to see so-and-so and taking it further from the other angle. So we always tried to be helpful, but we had to be pretty brutal just to try and get through the sheer volume of stuff. And of course, in those early days, and one of the things that it highlighted to me yet again is why we're not well governed by being part of the UK, is as announcements were being made in London, and when there was a consequential effect for Scotland, it was a day or two later before we knew what Scotland was getting and what our localised stance was going to be up here. So you had this time lag when more confusion was in there than needed to be, whereas if we'd been independent, we'd have been making the decision for ourselves and everybody would have heard it on day one. So again, it just highlights a key deficit that we have in that weakness. So we survived that, and we had I'm pleased to say, after the first couple of weeks, we had a lull for a week or two in that it went back to almost normal levels, and now we're seeing fits and starts as things emerge. And obviously there's still a lot of people who fell through the cracks in the government schemes, some of the excluded, particularly the self-employed, for example. And I think the big fear that I have is that as lockdown eases and things start to go back towards a a new normal rather than the old normal is that the cracks will get bigger rather than less.
Yeah.
So I've got that real worry that the workload's going to be there for quite some time to come.
Yeah. I mean, I know it's probably difficult to aggregate things, but were there any major themes that were common throughout those 1,000 emails?
The big one from day one was obviously self-employed, and particularly tourism-related businesses who knew they were going to be absolutely hammered, and that's to an extent continued pretty much the way through. Although each time something else comes round, we get another wave. At the beginning, well, I'm pleased to say we didn't have vast numbers. We had more than enough to keep ourselves really busy. Was people stuck abroad, which was an issue in the initial period as well. And I don't think the UK response was brilliant in the initial period. I think, if I'm being fair, it's not an easy one to deal with when you have literally, I think the figure was estimated around 3 million UK citizens out of the country at one point, that it created problems. So I empathise with anyone trying to deal with that problem, but there were a lot of vulnerable groups that were stuck abroad that really could have dealt with more support. And I think every country will have had that same problem. I don't think that would have made any difference whether we'd been independent or not. But I think had we been independent, we would have hopefully been able to get a better response to the people that were most vulnerable and most isolated. I think we could have had earlier repatriation flights than we did, and when the UK airlines were pretty much grounded all over the world, I'm sure there'd have been staff that were desperate to get back as well. There could have been some way of commissioning a lot of those, but it's easy to be critical after the event. At the time, I think we have to just realise that everybody was trying to deal with an unprecedented situation.
I felt it personally because I came back from Spain, I think it was on Friday the 13th of February, and I think they stopped the flights on Saturday. So we got back by the skin of our teeth. Otherwise, I'd be stuck in Spain, and goodness knows, I mean, who knows? Tell us a little bit about your background, Martyn. What were you doing before you became an MP?
Well, don't hold any of that against me. Before I was into politics, I was in banking, so that's two of the most despised professions in the world. I think after independence, when I'm looking for a new career, it always has to be, I suppose, either journalism or private traffic enforcement to keep up with that kind of trend. But that's where I started. I left school, I was educated in Linlithgow, and I went to work for what was then the old Bank of Scotland before the first merger, and I quite enjoyed that. It was branch banking. It was a different kind of culture than banking now. And as we came up to the first Scottish Parliament election in 99, so it'd be 98 at the time, the bank brought out a policy for what they called the parliamentary leave scheme that would give any member of staff that was looking to stick their toe in the water and for a political career up to a 6-year career break with a guarantee of their job back. Now, I didn't stand for the Scottish Parliament. One of my colleagues, Stuart Stevenson, who later became an MSP, did stand in the Linlithgow constituency at that time, and I was his election agent. But I stood for the local council that same year, which was on the same day, and took advantage of the same scheme. So at the time, I thought it was meant to be a 3-year Scottish council term to get it midway between the Scottish Parliament elections. That was the original thinking back then. So I thought, perfect, 6-year career break, stand for election. If I get elected, I can do potentially 2 years before I have to, 2 terms, I should say, before I have to make up my mind whether I'm going back to a professional career or sticking with a political one. And the best laid plans of mice and men, as they say, totally went away from me there. And within the first year and a half or whatever, they changed the term to a 4-year term, which meant I would have to have decided midway through a second term. And I should say I got elected the first time with a slender majority of 21 and what was an over 80% turnout. So I felt I kind of had to fight again to make sure the party held that council seat, and we did. We held it with over 450 votes the next time, but that was the die cast and there was no going back. So, and I've had a very enjoyable sort of
political career, I did 16 years on West Lothian Council, representing the Linlithgow area. And the first largest part of that was the old single member council wards, which were much easier to manage. And then the latter period was basically a term and a half on the multi-member ward in the same area. And then 2015, I was elected to Westminster, having fought the area very heavily during the referendum. In 2014, we ran a 2-year referendum campaign in the Linlithgow area, very cross-party. We had members of the Scottish Socialist Party, the Scottish Greens, people that were unaligned, some of the radical independence people. We had a really good mix of the community, and we knocked 7 bells out of the area. We chapped every door at least 3 times. We went back to people who had said they were undecided in the latter period, and we saw the movement towards us. I have to say, we started just after the council elections in 2012 when the Yes campaign was launched, and I was out at that stage. We were out a couple of times a week with, as I say, it was cross-party. One of the lads, Eddie Cornick, who was a Scottish Socialist Party person, I think he's still involved in their party executive, but he'd stood in one of the elections before against me at the council election, and we were out chatting doors together, and that caused a wee bit of confusion for a few people when you working together. Well, we're on the same side, we agree. But right from the beginning, I have to say, I thought we had not a snowball's chance of pulling off a yes vote in the area, because we just weren't getting the numbers, and I thought there was too much of a mountain to pull back. Now, we're lucky in Linlithgow if we were getting 1 in 5 people saying they were supporting independence in the early period of that, and I think we got it a lot closer. It was only the latter period of that campaign, when we had round about the time we had the opinion poll that just nudged yes ahead. I thought we could maybe just snatch this, and at that stage we were going around speaking to the people we'd identified over 2 years as being potentially undecided, and we were seeing a massive change in those people's views. So we started to think, well, maybe we could just nudge it. We didn't. The rest, as I say, is history, but we're going to get another shot fairly soon, I think. So it's a bit of unfinished business.
Well, I'm sure there's most of the audience tonight will be hoping and praying that we get another shot sometime soon. What was you then stood for Parliament. What was your mother's advice at that time?
Well, my mother has always been one of my strongest supporters and one of my fiercest critics if she thinks I've got something wrong. But when I told her I was going to go forward for Westminster, she says, "Martyn, nobody in their right mind would want to go to Westminster." And I kind of thought, well, that's probably right. I got there and I thought, my God, it certainly was right. It's not where you want to go by choice, but as long as Westminster has a say over what happens in Scotland, we need to have a team of people down there putting up a credible resistance and making sure more people at home see how ineffective it is for actually governing us here. So there's a role to be played, and I think there's a platform that we can use at Westminster, because the reality is if we say something in Parliament, it will get far more coverage than just putting out an angry tweet does on Twitter. So we've got to use every tactic that we can, and that's a platform that does give us an added air of credibility. The arguments alone should be credible enough, but the reality is a lot of people take it more seriously if it's said in Parliament. So
yeah, I think that must be the case. And I mean, obviously there's an enormous discussion all the time. I mean, it sometimes strikes me that Scotland must have the most learned, in general terms, electorate in the world. Because wherever you go, almost people are aware of the Constitution. That they're to be part of a country that has no written Constitution. It almost strikes me as remarkable that people can. I mean, I often go around the country talking about constitutions, and very often people will come up to me and say, "Just run it past me again. What is sovereignty?" And you think, well, hold on a second. I lived 20 odd years in Berkshire. Nobody ever asked me what sovereignty was.
Yeah.
And the only sovereign they were aware of was in the royal family and maybe an old coin, but there was nothing beyond that. There was no sense of how the system operated at all.
No, it is quite incredible, and it's all classes, it's all walks of life. It's not, it's not just the chattering class, the people that are over intellectualised things. It's everybody. And best example I had of that was not long after I was first elected in 2015. I was walking down Linlithgow High Street to get my messages, and two lads were sitting with a bottle of Bucky on a bench and shouted to me, "Hi, Martyn." I thought, oh no. I thought, well, I'll just have to say hello and be polite. I can't get, if they're abusive, I'll leave. But I mean, I went up and said, "Hi, what's it, lads?" And they asked me about something they'd been watching on the Parliament TV channel the previous week. And I didn't know what the answer was. I hadn't been in that debate. I had to go and check what was going on. But they'd been watching it and they were right. It was nonsense that they'd seen, and they were, what was all that about, And I think that's the one big advantage that we got out of the referendum campaign, is that we normalised the concept of independence, and we radicalised a generation, if not the entire country. So people are aware now in a way that they were not in 2012 when we started the campaign. And that awareness hasn't gone away. People don't switch the light off and become disinterested. They remain there.
Yeah, I think once you become informed, it's very hard to be uninformed.
Yeah.
You can be disinformed, but I suspect you can't be uninformed. Yeah. You've got a significant majority. I mean, what's your majority now?
It's a good 11,000 again. Yes, it was. I mean, I do have the largest electorate as well, so there is a factor in size in that. But yeah, it's a good, healthy majority.
What is it as a proportion of your total electorate?
I would actually need to go and double check that. Actually, off the top of my head,
your electorate's 88,000, and you're 11,000. That's a very healthy proportion.
Oh yeah. It was a very healthy majority. Yeah, I mean it was larger than both the Labour and Tory vote combined.
Really?
I mean, there were other parties in the contest as well.
That's huge.
Sorry, the vote I got was larger than the two combined, not the majority, I should say.
Yeah, say that. Yeah, but 11,000 is now. Was it 11? You raised it, didn't you? It wasn't 11,000 when you first stood, was it, in 2015?
2015, no. 2015, I got a better majority. 2015, we got the landslide, almost 13,000 of a majority. So, and then that dropped back to, I think it was about 3.8 the next time, and then we've got back up again in 2019. So, it's a healthy, good starting position. And I mean, there's multiple factors on why parties do well in one year and bad in another. But I mean, one of the factors from myself, and I've no doubt this played a major factor in why the vote collapsed in 2017 and why it resurged again in 2019, is we just weren't fighting on the independence issue in 2017. I mean, I fought a parliamentary election in 2017, and I'd had more references to Scottish independence in my council campaign literature in previous years, whereas in 2019 we had a direct reference to independence on every single piece of literature we put out, and it was the driving force again, as it always should be for an SNP campaign, and it re-engaged with our voters, which was much more what they wanted to hear, and that's what we've got to deliver. Yeah. We had good messages in 2017. I'm not saying we didn't, but people don't vote SNP because they want a strong opposition at Westminster. They vote SNP because they want independence and they want the fight taken to Westminster. So,
how do you respond to the argument that some people take the view that they say, "Oh, it's impossible down there. MPs, SNP MPs, are very badly treated. There's an enormous lack of respect, and you should all just come home."
Well, I've got some sympathy for that position. I mean, I'm trying to make sure that I don't have to have a long career down there, and I think the way things are shaping up now, that's looking like I'm going to get my wish. We are treated in a poor manner. There is a level of disrespect to some extent. There's a level of disinterest, which is probably the greater factor. But by being there, we expose that to other people who haven't seen it. And that's the key. I mean, we all know we're never going to get anything out of Westminster that we really want. I think Andrew Fletcher said in the early period of 1707, when the Union was going through, that Scottish MPs could dance around for all eternity in a trap of their own making. And that's where we are. We've got the escape route, and the escape route is public opinion at home. We have to use Westminster as a platform to raise the issues we want to get into the public awareness. And that's just too good a platform for us to ignore. So I wouldn't go down the abstentionist Sinn Féin approach. I understand why they do it. They have a different tradition than us. But our tradition is very much parliamentarianism, and we prove that we try and make things work. So it's not us that's trying to wreck it. It's just not workable. And the more evidence we can show that to right-thinking people, more people will say, well, this is beyond reform. We just need to get our independence and get away from it. So I went down there with open eyes, thinking that we had a fixed term Parliament Act that meant a term would be 5 years. When I stood in 2015, I thought, going to have to do a full term. Chances are, with the size of majority we had then, that we would get elected for a second term. I thought independence was probably looking at the 5 to 10 years away for another shot at it. And I wasn't sure if I'd want to ever do any more than that. I have to say, we've had 3 elections in that period, we just to come up to the second one. Just having the second one now if it'd been the proper fixed term. But I don't think the timetable on that has changed in any way. And if we can have a referendum, I don't think there's any realistic chance of one this year, which was the original plan, which is a great disappointment, because I think we're now in the position where we would win one, and then we'd have been able to roll into the Scottish Parliament election next year with a referendum victory being re-endorsed by a popular mandate, and that would have been a much stronger place to be in than we are. But things are where they are with coronavirus. But if we have a referendum next year, if we're looking at a 2-year negotiation period, we probably won't need to worry fighting another Westminster election again in our lifetimes. So I will get my footnote in history as the last MP for Linlithgow and East Falkirk, which is what I've said all along I want. Nobody will top that, as far as I'm concerned. So.
Well, let's hope you get your wish. We've had a question from Everywoman6 on Periscope. She's saying, can we please move the 2021 election to 2020 and get on the front foot while we still have a parliament here?
Well, I think there is a real sense of urgency, and I mean the stuff Mike Russell's exposed about the risk of a further power grab in the last day or two indicates that we really don't have time to waste. Coronavirus basically stops us really doing anything electorally this year, I think, in any realistic terms. In fact, I think, depending on how the spread of the virus goes, there's a risk for next year as well. I mean, the various English elections were put back from this year to next year. I think that gives us an added advantage if we can keep to the original date, because it means there's more contests for the British parties to be dealing with at the same time. So they have to split their resources, their efforts, their call centres. They can't concentrate on ourselves. We have a good machine on the ground, although how we respond to campaigning in socially distanced times might be a bit more difficult if we aren't back to a more fully normal by then. I think there's big issues. I'm a bit of an electoral anorak, but I think there's big issues in what you prepare now, because do you need to prepare for maybe an all postal ballot in case there's another spike or a second wave of coronavirus? So I think there's a few things there that our colleagues in the Scottish Parliament need to be looking at and thinking how reliable is it, because I think we don't want to risk the election not happening in May 2021. I think that would be a disaster.
Yeah, I think you must be right there. There's also a question that's popped up from Everywoman again. She says, does Martyn agree with the GRA and the hate crime bills?
Jerry, it's an area that's devolved. I've kept out of it at Westminster because I can't influence what happens to England, and I shouldn't be influencing that. Our Scottish Parliament colleagues have looked at it in detail. It's one of these ones where you get people very passionately one way or the other. I think for the vast majority of people in the street, it's not an issue that's really on their radar, and we need to be careful not to be fighting on gender. We'd be better fighting on class and economic welfare for people than gender-related issues. But we need to make sure there's proper equality in the world, and that's something that we've got to do. And this there's too much intolerance. We just need to accept that people are what they are. Everybody's somebody's some mother's son or daughter, and we just need to get on with each other a bit better, I think.
Question. This is Westminster now. The question on YouTube is it the responsibility of the UK Border Force to check on people who in quarantine, or for them to inform a Scottish agency to carry out these checks?
I think that's an interesting question. I think I didn't follow the First Minister's briefing today, but I saw the Twitter feed while I was watching the statement in the chamber. So it does appear that we're now going to be getting that information in Scotland. So if anyone does come back to Scotland via an English airport, we will know. So there'll be the ability to do checks that people are quarantining if they've came from a country where there is a higher incidence of COVID-19. And I think that principle that we're asking for quarantine from places that have a higher incidence than ourselves is a very good one in the public health handling of it, because our figure, I think, that was quoted today was with, I double check if I'm correct, I think it was 28 cases per 100,000. Now the UK average was put at, I think it was around 180 cases per 100,000. And the example, the one that's majorly different than the UK, is Spain, which was put at about 330 cases per 100,000. But within that, the other day when I looked before the health statement, there were 39 local authority areas in England or Wales that had cases that were over 600 per 100,000. So there's a real danger of this escalating out of control in parts of England. So I think establishing, first of all, the principle that people coming into Scotland from an area with a higher incidence than ourselves would be looking at a quarantine is a very good principle to have. Now, I hope the English and the Welsh tackle their hotspots and it doesn't spiral out of control. But it's a good principle to have in case we do need to look at quarantines from other parts of the country.
Do you think at some stage it might be necessary to control the border?
I think
very infected or potentially infected in England.
Yeah, I think that's the case, and I don't think virus respects borders, so it's not an administrative thing. I think if you had, as we've seen with the lockdown in Leicester, if you have an area that is in danger of being out of control or is out of control, you have to lock it down and prevent travel to and from, except for key events. So the border, if there was an English outbreak, that would make sense to me. I mean, you hope you don't have to do that because we are a shared island with the rest of the other countries in the UK. So it would be far better if we adopted an elimination strategy across all of them and got on top of the virus so that we could almost pretty much go back to normal. But if that didn't happen, then we need to have every tool in the arsenal. And one of the things I was advised in politics when I first got involved was the only thing you never say is never. You have to have every option available to you when you need it, so
never and always. always is not a good word to use as a politician. Yeah. I think there was a guy called Tip O'Neill who was the Speaker in the House in the United States, and he was a gruff sort of Irish American, and his stronghold was Boston, not unsurprisingly, and he claimed that all politics is local.
Yes.
He said, if you think politics isn't local, he said, you're in for a terrible shock.
I would say that pretty much echoes my experience over the years. I mean, if it's not relevant to somebody local, it doesn't matter to them.
Yeah. Again, there's a question from YouTube. I'll come back. There's another one as well. I'll come back to it, Peter Dixon, in a second. What happens if there's a big power grab before the elections, the Holyrood elections in 2021?
Well, I wouldn't put anything past Boris and his crowd. I mean, one thing we've learned from this pandemic is that while we are, as always, and we should always do the correct thing, we're playing everything straight up and fair. We've put the formal independence campaign on hold till we've got a grasp of the COVID-19 pandemic. That's the correct thing to do. You deal with one crisis at a time. and then you move on to what you want to do. What we've seen with Boris and co is that they've just carried on with their constitutional agenda. In fact, it's got a higher priority almost than dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. They've pursued the Brexit position. They've not considered an extension, which would be the sensible thing to do when you've got limited civil servants and they're dealing with different things. They're pursuing their revamp of Whitehall. So they're pushing all their constitutional agenda, I'd say, with as much, if not greater priority than they have been fighting the COVID pandemic. So we need to be alert that they may well try that. I don't think they'll move quite as quickly as that unless they need to do that to get their trade deal with America through, which would be the thing that would worry me in the short term. Because I think it's the danger to food standards it's going to be the first battle there. There'll be others. I mean, that's the opening salvo. So we need to be ready for that. We have powers, and we need to make sure we're defending them.
Do you draw a connection between keeping on the right side of the United States and the decision announced just recently, the last couple of days or so, about the border in the Irish Sea? Because obviously, if there were not a border in the Irish Sea, then I can imagine the Irish community in the United States going absolutely crazy, because it would look to me as if it was an attempt to confound the Good Friday Agreement.
Yeah. Well,
any trade deal with the US impossible.
Yeah, I think it's going to become a bit of a mess, whatever they do there with the border in the Irish Sea. It's not. I mean, it goes against what Boris had promised previously as well. So it just again highlights that we can't trust him. He says one thing and does another. Whether it's duplicitous or whether he just doesn't understand what he's saying, either way, we can't rely on anything that he tells us. So we need to be ready for that, and indeed anything else he comes out with.
What can you do practically if for example, he takes a beefed up Scotland office plus 7,000 civil servants based in Scotland and says, I'm going to give all the money to these guys and I'm going to take it away from the Scottish Parliament, and I can do that because there's no written constitution, and I can do, frankly, whatever I like.
Yeah,
you can that's with a pen.
That is a big risk, and there's probably not a lot we can do other than make sure we get the right vote and get the independence, because there isn't any other option there.
Don't you think a move like that, though, would tend to sway some of the people who are swithering in the middle towards a more radical position on independence?
I think it would sway some, although we also have to be careful as well, because there'll be some people out there who we haven't yet reached, and they're not committed unionists, they're not committed nationalists, or on the fence leaning towards us. I think that kind of a stance would push people who are on the fence leaning towards us far more quickly into our camp. But there's another group that really aren't that bothered about what's going on, and if they just see, oh, that's good, something we're interested in is getting funded, they're probably not that bothered who's funding it. So there's a danger there that they might try and use that as a way of pulling some of that audience more firmly towards the no side. So we have to highlight what's been deprived if that funding is taken away or centralised on the other things, so that people see what they're potentially losing out, not just the gimmick and the gesture politics, which is what it would become.
I think that would probably be an important role for MPs and MSPs to help people understand that very clearly, because the thing about Scots is that Scotland is an argument, as somebody once said to me. If you get on the wrong side of Scotland's argument, you're toast. And really, I mean, it's very hard to come back. I mean, I was thinking particularly about, and it tends to be emotional buttons that get pressed that produce this extraordinary, almost disproportionate effect. I'm thinking particularly about the national anthem being played at Murrayfield. All of a sudden, presumably that had been happening for decades, but something happened somewhere on the line, and everyone then became outraged. I mean, many people who not then and probably not now would vote for independence became very upset. It struck me that if you get on the wrong side of Scotland, you're in so much trouble.
Yeah, oh, very, very much, yeah. Well, I think we saw that last week just with some of the reaction from people who I would say were not particularly political, getting outraged about Boris's comments about there not being a border.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Well, again, it's an emotional thing, and also if it's illogical. A lot of Scots get very upset when they think that somebody's trying to sort of. My mother used to say, "Put one over on you." I mean, that produced an extraordinary response. I always found. Whereas south of the border, people would sort of say, "Well, that's politicians for you," and shrug perhaps to some degree. Well, by the way, Fiona Graham sends her regards. She's listening in. And Peter Dixon on Facebook has a question. He says, "Would the digital covenant be a good way to go?"
Digital covenant. Now, I'm not entirely certain what he's meaning by the concept. So just.
I may be misusing the term here, Peter, and I do apologise because I should probably know better. I think it's a way of dealing with a Scottish constitution and a way of dealing with public views using digital methodology. Because you said earlier, and it's a good point, because I think, as you said earlier, using the existing systems takes some months to put in place. The paper-based systems, they have to be. There's a required and very necessary process, but some of that requirement in terms of time is based on the fact that the system is predicated upon bits of paper. You go somewhere and you put a cross on a piece of paper, and it goes somewhere else, and somebody laboriously puts it on a big table and counts it along with other X's and whatever. And then eventually at midnight, or sometimes a wee small hour, says, "Look, Martyn won, and he won conclusively." But it seems to take forever, whereas I suspect an increasing number of people are saying, "Hey, we're all connected nowadays, or we can get to libraries and be connected. Why can't we do all of this stuff online? It's instant. You don't have to wait for somebody in a television studio to tell you."
I mean, I'm certainly a big fan of digital. I run a paperless office just as an example, and that gives me the power to deal with stuff wherever I am, and I can see what the staff have been doing, and we can exchange messages. I'm not so keen on digital voting from an electoral point of view, because I think there's a process there that needs scrutiny, and everybody needs to be confident that the result that's announced is the correct result. And just to use an example that probably everybody listening will be familiar with, the 2014 referendum, there's loads of stories of people being concerned about the outcome of the result. Now, I'm 100% certain that the result I saw in West Lothian was the result that was on the ground. It wasn't the result I wanted, but I'm confident that reflected where we were. So I wouldn't be able to say that with any confidence if it had been a digital process and we hadn't seen the outcome. So knowing the processes, seeing individual ballot boxes, seeing that good areas, bad areas, you've got a much better feel for, is that correct? And if it's not, if there's something jiggery pokery, can you monitor it? I mean, just an example from the 2019 election, we had a query. I'll not name the people or the incident. It turned out to be a non-event, but a young lad got in touch to say he'd been in voting at a polling station, and he thought the presiding officers in the place were giving out extra ballot papers to people. Now, it turns out it was a disabled person who was in a car. There was a perfectly valid proxy vote, and it was all above board. But somebody saw that, thought something was wrong, immediately got in touch with myself. I got one of my local people to go up and check, and everything was perfectly explained. Now, you need those kind of controls and counter checks so that we can say everything's above board. And I think the risk is that you can't do that if you don't see people going to vote, or when the ballots are going out and there's a physical process. So we've got much more ability to monitor that. I think there's a lot of things we could do to improve the electoral system we have. I think we should have automatic electoral registration. We shouldn't be dependent on people having to fill in. I think they should be looking at a system of not just postal voting, which I think actually is pretty robust. I'm one of the people who thinks it's more robust than physical voting, because you have to have identifier checks, whereas with physical voting, anyone can walk in and say they're somebody. But I think we should have advanced voting as well, because every election I've been involved in, people come forward at the last minute, we're too late to get a postal vote, they've some family emergency, or they've realised they're going on holiday, or they're not there. So there should be some method to register late and have a physical vote, whether it be in the local authority headquarters or somewhere in the constituency that they had to travel. I think that would be a reasonable thing to have to support the democracy we have. But I wouldn't go digital on voting, and I certainly wouldn't want online. I'd be relaxed about where people were voting, as long as there was no undue influence. So I'm not fussed about this idea of should we have ballot boxes in supermarkets. Wouldn't upset me if that was a sensible place, but there needs to be the ability for campaigners to scrutinise, for people to vote in secrecy. So
it's been pointed out to me that digital covenant is a way of getting people to register, saying they want independence using a secure blockchain technology.
Right, yeah. Well, I would have no problem with that at all. In fact, I think as long as everything complies with the GDPR rules that people need to comply with, I think actually having a strong list of pro-independent supporters that could be communicated with by a central body to give campaign messages and such would be a real asset in a campaign. So the sooner you have an organisation on the ground collecting that, probably the better.
Yeah, I think what he's suggesting is slightly more than that. He's suggesting that in fact the actual voting is done by blockchain technology.
All right.
If you're asking people if they support independence or not, you actually use technology to establish that, so that people actually use digital means. So a referendum, for example, might be conducted digitally. I mean, I think you've probably answered that question.
Yeah.
Here's a question that's come in from Tom Kinnaird, and he's asking. This is on email. Is there a polling number we are waiting to reach before Indy Ref 2 is called? He's pointing out that the panel-based poll put yes at 54%, and he's suggesting there might be some sort of number that behind the scenes he has in mind that says as soon as the polling hits, say 60%, that's when we're going to really push for this.
If there is, nobody's told me, but I want it as high as we can get it. I mean, the bit that concerned me, and I think there was a real risk in the recent past that we've gone past this risk, so I think we're now in a much safer territory. But the bit that would have worried me would have been if Boris, when he'd taken over the premiership, had immediately acquiesced to our demand for the Section 30 and put time constrictions on an early referendum. I think there was a real risk that we were not in the position of guaranteeing a win. I think we were behind at that time, and I think a short campaign, when everybody was focused on Brexit, would have been totally the wrong optic, and we would have struggled. So I think he kind of blew that one by being belligerent, which gave us a moral high ground. And then the election in 2019 saw the Tories return with an overall majority, but on a share of the UK vote that was smaller than the share we got in Scotland. So our mandate for our demand for a referendum is better than his mandate, which is refusing us. So it's democratic outrage. We're now at the position that I've been looking for us to get to all my adult life. We're now, for the first time, I can say confidently, we're now demonstrating majority support for the concept of independence over a range of polls over the last few months. That's exactly where we want to be. Now, I mentioned earlier, it's really annoying that we're not going to be having, any realistic chance of the referendum this year, because if the original plan had been to hold it in the autumn of this year, where we are now would have been the perfect position to be in. And then to have won that referendum and then rolled into a Scottish Parliament election after that, irrespective of whether we've been given a Section 30 order or not, we'd have had a double lock mandate on not just having a referendum, but actually on having independence. But we are where we are. But we're in a stronger position than we've ever been. So, it is working, what we're doing. We just have to keep nudging it up. But as long as we can maintain where we are, we can win, and that's the key zone now.
That's very interesting, Martyn. How troubled or not are you by the thought that on the 31st of December this year, the UK will effectively fall off a cliff because it will be a no-deal Brexit? And people are worried that Scotland being hauled off the cliff edge, along with everyone else, would make it very difficult to press for independence because their lives would be in a turmoil. There could well be shortages. The COVID-19 could reappear. You could possibly have a confluence of different very negative factors at work there.
Well, firstly, let me say I'm very worried about the 31st of December and the potential cliff edge. I think that's a very realistic possibility and the economic damage that it will do. I think, more likely there'll be some sort of hodgepodge deal, which the Tories will trumpet as they've delivered Brexit up with a deal, but it won't be a good deal. I'll be confident of saying that, and it may well be the absolute no-deal disaster. So that's the problem. I come to a different conclusion because it's been done to us, and the economic harm will have been inflicted upon us. So the best thing we can possibly do is, we've warned everybody this is what could happen, is to sort the mess out for ourselves by making our own decisions. So I think it strengthens the independence case, because I don't think any Tory-led government is going to come to the kind of economic decisions that would recover us in Scotland with our agenda. It'd just be an unmitigated disaster. So I think it strengthens the case. I don't want people going through pain and job losses, but if that's what happens as a result of the 31st of December, it's how can we recover best from it. And I think independence allows us to recover the way we want to recover, and that's the best we can do.
People will be entirely absorbed just getting by from day to day.
People will be, but I mean, we've had the impact of the coronavirus. We know that there's going to be increasing unemployment as a result, as industries have been devastated by that. The Brexit situation is not looking particularly good at the moment. I don't think it's going to get any better. That will add further pain. All of that says we can't continue to let these people make our decisions for us, because it's got us in this mess. So we have to just take responsibility and make sure we get out of it. So I think it's a strong point as to why we need our independence. It's an unfortunate one, because we don't want people going through pain and misery, and it's I think politically unnecessary. But we are where we are, and it's what's been done to us. So.
Okay, very good. Two things I need to ask you about. One is how you met Nadia, and why you think Hug a Granny is an effective political approach.
Yes. Well, Nadia, in case anyone doesn't know, is my partner. Nadia, the reason I have an Indian flag in the corner here, I have a saltaire in the garden, an Indian flag in the house, so you know who's in charge of what bit, although Nadia does the garden as well, I should say. But is from Kerala in South India, and we met in London. The one positive thing I've brought back from London was Nadia. She was here doing her studies, and she was one of the individuals that Theresa May caused a problem for with the TOEIC visa system, one of the many Home Office scandals. A whole host of students, thousands of students, had their visas cancelled because it was alleged that people had cheated on the English examination that proved they could speak English. And my partner was one of those people, and I met her at a lobby in Parliament on the issue. I went to the lobby to get more information because I had a constituent who'd contacted me about it, who, just to emphasise further how crazy the decisions that are made at Westminster was, this constituent that contacted me was a native English speaker, but it came from a country that wasn't recognised as an English language country. So he had to sat this test, sat it with a firm that had been accused of cheating. And it made no sense to me how this guy was a problem, because I sat in his house and had this perfect conversation with him. And then I met my partner Nadia, who had studied here, had a master's degree that she'd gained in in the UK and clearly spoke fluent English. We wouldn't have been able to have a relationship if you hadn't, because I even now, with 4 years of home lessons, I cannot speak Malayalam, which is her native language. So that was it's an ill wind that doesn't blow somebody some good. So that was luck for me. I'm not sure it was quite as lucky for Nadia, because she's had a lot of misery and suffering as a result of years of struggle on that case. And the other question was, yes, hug a granny. Yeah, I think that we all know the area we're weakest in for the independence movement is the older population, and older women more than older men, but older people. And the reality is, I can go around with the best political messages and the best silver tongue I can muster, but I'm not going to convince that many of them. I'll speak to them, be polite, we'll get information. The people who are going to win them over are their own relatives. And I had a perfect example of this in the 2019 election. I was up in Armadale, and this elderly woman, she did tell me her age, I can't remember it. It was a seriously high number.
Best not to go there, Martyn.
Best not to go there. I'm not naming either. And I did the canvass, and yep, she was voting for me, and she was voting SNP for the first time in her life. And I asked about independence, and she said, yep, she'd voted no in 2014, but she was going to vote yes when it came round. So I had to ask her why. You know, I thought, am I going to get the grain that's going to just allow me to win over hundreds, if not thousands, of similar voters? And she said to me, yeah, I always voted for the Tories up till now, because when she was a young girl, her father had been a Churchill fan and had told her to vote Tory, and she just kept voting Tory all her life without really giving it any thought. That was what her family did. And her grandkids had persuaded her that they were supporting the SNP and wanted independence, so she was now voting for what they wanted. And I think we because we're all political anoraks, we over-intellectualise things a bit, and we think, you know, political warfare. But for a lot of people out there, they don't think like that. They think, how does it affect my family? What do my relatives want? And if you're not burning with a political view, voting the way your family want for the outcome is as good a reason as any. So I think, yeah, if we can just get the younger people, and the polls are suggesting that we're winning the younger audience by a landslide, just speaking to their loved ones, because they're the ones that can convince them in a way that nobody else can, and not just convince them. When they've told them something and they've gone through it, and I had another couple in 2015 that were like this. They'd been Communist Party supporters and had voted Labour all their days, but had switched to the SNP in the 2015 election for exactly the same reasons. And it was their grandson that had convinced them. They were watching the TV news and they were arguing with their grandson every other week. But the difference is that when we have a political leader, it's so easy for the mainstream media to demonise any individual that we put up, whether that be Alec or Nicola or whoever else. You cannot demonise somebody's grandson or the next door neighbour or the person that they trust in their community. And I think that's the biggest asset we've got, is the individuals that support independence, taking that message out and winning over the people they have respect and understanding with.
So it's all about doorsteps then?
It's all about doorsteps, which is going to make the next, at least the next 6 months, very difficult for us all, because we're not really near the doorstep. So we're going to have to think of clever ways of campaigning. But again, the family connections and the personal connections will be speaking to people on the phone or through Skype or Zoom calls. So it's up to each one of us to be convincing our unconvinced friends and family. And that's something we can all do.
What's your feeling about the mood in your constituency, Linlithgow and East Falkirk, in terms of yes support? How would you classify it? Would you say it was in line with the opinion polls, or not?
I think prior to the coronavirus outbreak, which I was out every week on several occasions, if the weather permitted, 2-3 times a week, banging doors and speaking to people about issues that concern them. And I always ask about the independence question when I'm out doing that. And I would say that it pretty much reflected the national position. We were doing pretty well with certain audiences, certain communities. We weren't doing so well in others, but overall we were probably not quite there. We were a wee bit short. But there was a lot of people that were sympathetic but not quite with us. So I think I've no reason to suspect that it's any different than what we're seeing in the national polls. I can't wait till I can go out and speak to them and confirm that, because that will make me feel a lot more comfortable. But I think a lot of people have firmed up as a result of how Scotland's handled the coronavirus pandemic and the incompetence of the Boris government. I mean, it looks like unless you had a senior position with the Leave campaign, you're not likely to get a government contract. I mean, everything looks dodgy about the way they're operating, and I think that's helping by contrast with our smooth handling up here now. I don't think anyone's got coronavirus right anywhere in the world apart from maybe New Zealand, but we've handled it much better and we've got it under control faster within the same sort of framework. So all that's helped, and I don't think those feelings will go away. And one of the burning feelings that is definitely impacted on people was Boris's doubling down over Dominic Cummings. In the 5 years I've been in Parliament, I can honestly say we had somewhere between 300 and 400 emails on the issue from people, every one of them individually written. There was no campaign email from a central website where you get a lot of campaign emails. But every single one was written by the individuals telling us about their personal and family sacrifices, about missing loved ones' funerals, about their being unemployed or not, their business failing, or living on 80% of the wages was in some of the better cases, how they hadn't seen their grandkids. Every one of them was packed with raw emotion and anger. And people don't forget that. When you press those buttons, they will be voting on the back of that anger against Tories for decades to come, probably, because it was just indefensible.
I think that was my thought about when something goes visceral, it sticks. If it's in the gut, it sticks. You can talk about it till you're blue in the face, but if it's felt viscerally, then people tend to sort of have that view. Well, our time's almost up, Martyn. A big thank you to you. I mean, thank you so much. 60 minutes. It's just gone in an instant, frankly.
Yeah, no.
We've still got a bunch of questions to ask you, but we've run out of time. But that's not hugely unusual. I wish we could have got round to it. David McHarg, I'm sorry, but if we get Martyn on again, I'll make a point of putting that question to him. And also a big thank you to all of you out there for joining us this evening. I hope you've enjoyed the TNT show, The Nation Talks. As always, we have a formidable list of guests lined up for future shows. Next week, we have Jed O'Brien, who joins us, and he tells us all about Andrew Watson. You've heard of Andrew Watson? You haven't heard of Andrew Watson. You need to hear about Andrew Watson. Andrew Watson was the world's first black footballer. And you'll learn from Jed how he came to be capped 3 times for Scotland. And Jed will also tell us how Scotland invented modern world football. Yeah, you don't want to miss this show. So join us next Wednesday at 7 p.m. for The Nation Talks. Oh, and look out for the Constitution column in the Sunday National this weekend. And also, very, very importantly, please support Indy Live. These guys do a great job. Indy Live Radio, new voices for a new Scotland, and for all the news that you're not getting. And if you've liked this show and you've been listening to what Martyn's been saying, put your hand in your pocket, send some money to Indy Live. They could really appreciate it. And as for the BBC, I repeat my offer to give them a full hour to themselves and to tell us how they feel that Scotland should trust their output. Well, everyone, thanks again. Join us next Wednesday. And remember, it's a great day for British democracy. Good night, all.
Good night.
Hello everyone, John Drummond here, host of the TNT Show.
Linlithgow.radio.
Hi, Dr. Dave here. Join me for the Dr. Dave Show, Wednesday night, 9 o'clock, with repeats early Friday morning and 3 o'clock Saturday afternoon. Music, views, your requests and your comments. A great bit of fun and banter. Join me on indylive.radio, a new voice for a new Scotland.
Hi, I'm Fiona from Clackmannan Show Women for Independence. Did you know we have a podcast on Indy Live Radio? Goes out at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, repeated at 6 o'clock on a Thursday. Come and join us for some news, views, opinions, the odd poem. Be very nice to have you with us. And come and hear the news you're not getting. Here's some new voices for a new Scotland at Indy Live Radio.
Hello, my name's Steve B and I'm a presenter on Indy Live Radio. I present Music and Musings every Friday night at 7. The music, that's 70s classic rock, although we will take the occasional side road. The musings, well, they're thoughts on Scottish independence, politics and world events from my viewpoint, which is that of a grumpy old man. So join me every Friday night at 7 on Indy Live Radio, a new voice for a new Scotland.
Hi, this is Marley and I'm here to tell you a bit about Daytime Live Show, which goes out Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays on Indy Live Radio at 11:30 for a couple of hours. So I present the programme along with Val, and we're there with a variety of guests to chat to each day. Now, at the moment, Wednesday's show is a catch-up edition. It's not live. What we do is we rebroadcast some of the more recent interviews. So we hope we enjoy all of those. Be there at 11:30 on Indy Live Radio for the news you don't hear elsewhere, a new voice for a new Scotland.
Hi, James E here from the Saturday Show on indylive.radio. We play a wide selection and wide genre of music for your entertainment. We're on Saturday mornings from 10 till 1 p.m. Remember, join us on indylive.radio, a new voice for a new Scotland.
Watch this again, maybe part of it. It's Independence Live. Yeah, a few people asked about YouTube. It'll be YouTube/Independence Live. That's where you'll find it.
No Westminster. No Westminster, come on. No Westminster, not for me, not for me. But therefore I'll be your slave. I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Oh, freedom, come on. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom, one more. Oh, freedom over me. But before I be your slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
Wherever you stand, get the fresh view of what's happening in Scotland with iScot. Celebrate everything about our country with intelligent, in-depth insight from lifestyle, culture to puzzles. And all the opinions you'll need, whether it's digital or by post. Subscribe now to iScot.